Christian McCaffrey, he's doing it everywhere. He leads the team in rushing, receiving. He's got 626 yards receiving, and he has even just 30 yards less rushing with 596. Welcome to Just the Stats, NFL Top 10's for Friday. We are on the weekend. We had a Thursday night game. Well, there was a game on Thursday night, and it was okay. I mean, it was NFL football, but it wasn't much of a game, but we'll talk about it briefly. We'll also cover some more of the season leaders, some of the receivers, and scrimmage yardage. We'll also look at the teams. We'll look at some of the team stats. We'll see how far we get with that. But that'll be our Friday. So we'll start off with this Raiders Broncos game. Wow, it looked like it could be interesting. When the Raiders went down the field, I think maybe on their second drive or whatever it was, but early in the game, scored a touchdown. So there's 7 points right there. You think, all right, we got a game here. Well, that was it for the Raiders, 7 points. The rest of the game, they did not score. Fortunately for them, their kicker, Carlson, missed a field goal, which would have helped tie the game at 10-10. So the Denver Broncos ended up winning this game 10-7. And honestly, there were miscues. Smith was hurt, and you could see how much he was hurt late in the game. He just seemed to be hurting, limping around, going in the tent a couple of different times. And ultimately, he did finish the game, but he just did not look that good. All right, so real quick, like I said, missed a field goal. The Raiders missed a field goal, which would have given them a chance to tie. No saying that they would win, but they could have. Denver Knicks did not look good. Threw 2 interceptions. Smith threw 1 interception. I mean, there were 2 fumbles by the Raiders. They didn't lose them, but they still did have a couple of fumbles. Like I said, they missed a field goal. Broncos missed a field goal. Penalties. Both teams had 11 penalties. I mean, this was not a fun game to watch. The Raiders only had 188 yards, and Denver Broncos had 220. I mean, it was just not much of a game to watch. They looked fairly even. It was like who was going to make the least amount of mistakes. They kept making them over and over. And anyway, it just ended up 10-7. It just wasn't much of a game. Unfortunately, hopefully coming up on Sunday, we'll have a lot better games to watch. Some big games coming up, and should be a lot of fun. All right, well, that's a quick look at that game. Not much, like I said, to say. All right, now let's get back to season leaders here. And like I've been talking about as far as receptions go, Jamar Chase, once Jake Browning was benched and Flacco came in, has just been flying up the charts. And he's been number 1 the last couple of weeks. He jumped into the lead over, believe it or not, Christian McCaffrey of the 49ers. And now he has 76 receptions in 9 weeks. So he is almost averaging 10 receptions a game. They played 8 games. Christian McCaffrey's second. He's tied with Puka Nacua, who now, was playing. We'll see how his injury, he got hurt again a little bit. We'll see if how serious it is. They both have 61 receptions. So Jamar Chase already has a 15 reception lead over second best player. Pretty incredible how he's been playing, And then St. Brown for the Lions has 59 receptions. And Smith-Njigba for the Seahawks has 58, but he's just crushing it when we're talking about receiving yards. Those are your top players. You got, like I said, interesting. You don't often see a running back up in the very top of the reception leaders overall. So with 61, he's tied for second. And despite getting some players back like Kittle, still, it's all centered on him. Kittle has not been used as an offensive weapon for the 49ers, more of just an additional blocker, it seems like, for McCaffrey. And he's good at it. But I know if you're in fantasy and you have Kittle like I do on one team, you'd much rather see him catching passes than blocking for McCaffrey. You do have a couple of tight ends, Jake Ferguson and Trey McBride. What's interesting about those two is Ferguson had been up at the very top of the list. He's now sixth with 56 receptions. He's gradually fading down the list, and that's because CeeDee Lamb is back. And so that's given Prescott the ability now to throw to Pickens and Lamb versus Ferguson and Pickens. A little bit better option because it's down the field more, And then Trey McBride, on the other hand, has been moving up this list. So we'll see how that goes. One more going down the list was Keenan Allen, who had been one of the better receivers early in the season, but now for the Chargers, where he had been one of the leading receivers, now Gatson, their tight end, all of a sudden is the big receiver. And Ladd, Conkey is as well, whereas early in the season, neither one of those seemed to be the top receivers. So it's kind of flipped here. So he's almost out of the top 10. He's 10th right now. The only newcomer is Michael Pittman for the Colts. He has 52 receptions. So he's the only new person in the top 10 this week. Now, when we're looking at yards, well, like I said, Smith-Njigba, 948 yards. He's averaging well over 100 yards a game. He has been incredible. Jamar Chase is second. And like I've mentioned before, he led the NFL last year, Triple Crown, in fact, because he led in receptions, yards, and touchdowns. Now, I don't know if he's going to be able to catch Smith-Njigba. This past week, Jamar Chase did get 111 yards receiving, which is a good game. But Smith-Njigba had 129. So he's not gaining any ground there. He definitely passed him in the receptions. But Smith-Njigba for the Seahawks averages much more per catch than Chase does right now. So those are your top two players. Smith-Njigba, 948, only one over 900. Jamar Chase has 831, only player over 800. Then you have only two players over 700. That's George Pickens for the Cowboys, has 764, and Puka Nacua, who has 711 yards. Now, he's somebody, obviously, to watch. He could continue to slide up this top 10 since he is targeted quite a bit. Two new additions to this list, Drake London and Jalen Waddle. Drake London for the Falcons has 587 yards, and Jalen Waddle for the Dolphins has 586. They're new to the list. Only two new players in this top 10 list. And just as he was on the top 10 for receptions, Christian McCaffrey's in the top 10 for receiving yards as well. He's number 7 with 626 yards receiving. We'll see how important that is when we get to the scrimmage yards as well. He's the only running back on this list. Every other player on this list is a wide receiver. There's no tight ends currently in the top 10 as far as receiving yards go. So that's pretty interesting. Usually you get one of these top ends, like Bowers. We'll see what happens. He might move up this list. And Trey McBride, if he keeps catching as many passes lately as he has, he might make it into the top 10 at some point. Now, looking at receiving touchdowns, well, this is Devontae Adams. He's been racking them up. Couple touchdowns last week. He pushed him all the way up into first. He's got 8 receiving touchdowns now. Just a touchdown magnet. He, like I said, as mentioned, he's in the top 10 all time in receiving touchdowns. And he's got a chance to move up another spot here in a week or two. Second, we got a tight end. Dallas Goedert for the Eagles has 7 receiving touchdowns, as does Amon-Ra St. Brown for the Lions with 7 touchdowns. Those are your top 2. Now, T. Higgins jumped up into the top 10. He's tied for 4th. You got 5 6 players with 6 touchdowns. He had 2 touchdowns for the Bengals last week, which pushed him up into the top 10. So those are some of your players on this list. You got 2 Cowboys. Jake Ferguson and George Pickens both have 6 touchdowns receiving. That was the same last week. Neither one had a touchdown this week. The only team with 2 players in the top 10, or at least the top 9. Now, let's look at receptions by running back. And obviously, if Christian McCaffrey's in the top 10 for receptions in the entire NFL, he's going to be number 1 as far as running backs receiving. And he is. He's got 61 receptions for the 49ers. Next up, Devon Achane for the Dolphins has 43. So he's got a huge lead over the second best player, 18 receptions better than second Devon, who's in second. And then Bijan Robinson has 41. They're the only 3 players over 40. And in fact, Chase Brown has 33. It's quite a drop off those. So you got McCaffrey all by himself in 1, and 2 and 3, you've got Achane and Robinson, and then a drop down to Brown. And then you got a list of them all the way down the list. The only new player here, Kenneth Gainwell for the Steelers, now has 27 receptions. So he's a new addition to this list. All right, let's move on to one other player, Jonathan Taylor. I'll just mention real quick, has 27 receptions. So he's in the top 10. He's also he's number 1 in rushing yards right now. Now, looking at the receiving yards, again, it's McCaffrey. As he is in the top 10 in the NFL in receiving yards, he's also number 1 as far as running backs in receiving yards with 626 yards receiving. Next up, Bijan Robinson for the Falcons has 463. I mean, that's a big gap. It's 163 yards difference between first and second. What's amazing about that, then you have another even bigger gap between second and third. So despite Devon Achane for the Dolphins being second in receptions, he's third in receiving yards with only 274. Robinson has 463. So there's a huge gap between second and third as well. I mean, that's 189 yards between second and third. So that just shows you how high McCaffrey is, how great he's been this season overall. Jonathan Taylor's up here in receiving yards, 218. He's 4th. And unfortunately, Cam Scatterbo's 5th. He'll end up dropping off this list since he won't be playing anymore. Bucky Irving is still number 10, and he hasn't played in weeks. So I don't think he's playing this week. They keep looking at him, but I think he might be out this week again. He'll will almost definitely drop out of the top 10, at least until he gets back on the field, and he'll jump right back up into the top 10. Now, an interesting stat here is I mentioned Gainwell for the Steelers in the top 10 as far as receptions, but he's not in the top 10 in receiving yards. But Jaylen Warren for the Steelers is in the top 10 with 193 yards. So Jaylen Warren obviously is doing more with the receptions than Kenneth Gainwell is. A new addition to this is Chase Brown, who had a big game last week. He's now got 201 yards receiving by a running back. He's number 7, jumped all the way out of, not even in the top 10, jumped all the way to number 7. So those are a look at your receivers, running backs. Now, yards from scrimmage. This is a big one. I think this kind of tells you something about possible players of the year, offensive players of the year. And unless Christian McCaffrey was to break some kind of record or Jonathan Taylor, they're not going to win MVP. It's probably going to go to a quarterback. And right now, Stafford has looked to me as one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL overall. I think he's got 21 touchdowns and like 2 interceptions. So he has looked really good. But when it comes to a player that's invaluable to his team, as Stafford really probably is for his team, Christian McCaffrey, he's doing it everywhere. He leads the team in rushing, receiving. He's got 626 yards receiving, and he has even just a 30 yards less rushing with 596. I mean, just shows you how much they use him as a receiver as well. But he leads the NFL in yards from scrimmage with 1,222. There's only 3 players with more than 1,000 yards of total offense, yards from scrimmage. Jonathan Taylor second with 1,113. So a little over, 109 yards behind McCaffrey. And then Bijan Robinson for the Falcons, 1,058 yards. Those are the only three over 1,000 yards. Now, Robinson is more like McCaffrey in that his yardage is split much more evenly. Even though he is more yards rushing than receiving, it's still pretty evenly split. Whereas Jonathan Taylor, leads the NFL in rushing yards with 895 and has 218 receiving yards. So much difference than the way Robinson and McCaffrey are used. And obviously, Taylor is such a good running back. So that's a look at it. There's nobody in the top 10 new. There's no new player in this top 10, which is pretty interesting. You would think somebody might jump up into this list. Now, one player I will be watching is Rico Dowdle. We'll see if he is injured too much or not. But for the Panthers, who's already number 7, and like I've mentioned before, hasn't even played every game as a starter. So if he's going to be the continuous starter for the rest of the season, it'd just be interesting to see how he does as he moves up this list. Mention real quick, Jackson Smith-Njigba is number 4 on the list of yards from scrimmage, but it's almost all receiving. He's only got 22 yards rushing, and the rest is all receiving. He has a total of 970 yards. So I'm sure he'll go over 1,000 yards this week. He needs 30 yards. But those are your top players right now as far as yards from scrimmage. All right, let's shift gears here, and we'll look at some of the teams. And I was looking at this. It's pretty interesting. This is top 10 teams points per game. Indianapolis Colts still lead with 32.2 points per game. Now, last week they had 33.8, so they dropped a point and a half over the last week. But what was interesting is they weren't the only one. In fact, the Detroit Lions and the Dallas Cowboys also dropped. So last week there were 3 teams scoring more than 30 points a game. Now there's only one, and that's the Indianapolis Colts with 32.2. The Detroit Lions are second with 29.9. And the Dallas Cowboys dropped to 4th with 29.2. So it's pretty interesting as to watch that this is going down. And when I looked at this in the top 10, there were only 3 of the top 10 teams where their scoring average actually went up, not down. 2 of those teams jumped into the top 10. One was the Rams, who scored 34 points against the hapless Saints. And then the Chicago Bears, who scored 47 against the Bengals to win that game 47-42. So obviously you score 47 points, you're going to jump up. I mean, you almost double your average game average, single game average. So those 2 jumped into the top 10, which is 2 of the teams then who had an average higher than they did the previous week. And then the Seattle Seahawks were on the list last week with 27.6. They jumped up to 28.9. There are only 3 teams where the points per game went up, not down. And I guess we're going to probably see this. So it'll be interesting to see if the Indianapolis Colts can stay over 30 points a game for the rest of the season. And if any of these teams who are averaging 29 points a game can jump back up into 30-plus points. I don't know. Maybe as the season goes, it gets harder to score 30 points, in a game. But we'll see how that works out. And the same thing I was looking at, this was a little more even. Points allowed per game. 4 teams on this out of the top 10 lowered their points per game. And the rest all went up. Also on this list, no one new. Same top 10 as last week. So that's kind of interesting. The lowest was allowed was 20.5. Now it's 20.9. So that has changed a little bit. But Green Bay Packers dropped a little bit to 20.8. Seattle Seahawks, so they had such a good game that their points scored went up and their points allowed went down. They went from 19.4 to 18.8. Denver Broncos last week, on week 8, I should say, because they've just played this game, they had 18.9. They dropped to 18.4. Now, this week, since they played on Thursday, week 10, they only gave up 7 points. So they're going to drop even farther than 18.4. So we'll see where they end up. Right now, they're in fourth. They could, move up into third. We'll see. Though it's the Chiefs are in third, they'd have to allow a fair amount of points to move out of third. There's a big gap. Houston Texans, who led easily in this category by 2 points per game over the Rams, they went from 14.7 to 15.1, so now they're averaging 15 points, while the Rams went from 16.7 down to 15.9. So now you have two teams that are allowing less than 16 points a game. They're the only teams allowing less than 17 points a game, actually, because the Chiefs are third with 17.7, so almost a good 2 points worse than the Texans and the Rams. So that's interesting. The Chiefs, they're third best in points allowed per game, and yet their season record is 5-4. It's kind of interesting to have to look at all their games to see how come it's that way. Now, one more stat that kind of shows you this in a nutshell is the scoring margin. So the Colts, and again, only two teams' scoring margin went up. The rest in the NFL went down. In fact, the Indianapolis Colts are still number one, but they were outscoring the other team 14.5 by over 14 points a game. That dropped down to 12 points a game, 12.1 to be exact. While the Rams and the Seahawks went from 8 allowing or outscoring their other team by 8 points over 10 now, both of them. Seahawks 10.1, the Rams 10.3. So they're outscoring the other team by more than 10 points a game. That's pretty good. Kansas City Chiefs, as I was mentioning, even though they have a record of 5-4, they're outscoring their opponents by 8.4 points a game. So that's a little look at that. Like I said, only two teams really improved their stats, especially the Seattle Seahawks. Improved their scoring per game, improved their points allowed per game, which obviously increased their scoring margin per game by 2 points a game, just because of last week's game. Now, one other stat to look at here before we call it a day is turnover differential. Chicago Bears, they have a differential of 13. They've had 19 takeaways and only 6 giveaways, which is very impressive, honestly, for the Chicago Bears. I mean, Caleb Williams last year sacked all the time. Now, he didn't throw a lot of interceptions because he was sacked so much. He was afraid to let go of the ball. He's been much better in the sack department, and he's still not giving the ball away a lot. So pretty impressive. The Pittsburgh Steelers, second with a differential of 9. They've had 16 takeaways and 7 giveaways. Now, the Jaguars are third with 8. Though they were first, they jumped out after the first 5 games and was crushing this department and have faded back since then. But they're still third, 15 takeaways and 7 giveaways. That's a few of the teams. Now, the Philadelphia Eagles have only had 3 giveaways themselves. They've had only 7 takeaways, though, so they are a +4. They're the lowest on this list as far as even though they have a positive differential of 4. They don't take away the ball much, but they don't give it away either. So with only 3 giveaways so far this season, that's not bad at all. You could see that change, honestly. One of the teams I don't see in the top 10 is the Buffalo Bills. Last year, they had almost like a record season as far as giveaways. They had so few giveaways the entire season. And you knew that just had to change. That's one of the things that might be affecting their standings. The fact that they've lost is they are not in the top 10 at all. So they have less than a +4 margin right now. Now that's a look at some of the different stats this week. We will be going to, on Monday, I'll be looking at the games. Now, what I was doing initially was kind of giving you teams or players actually that had set some type of either set a record or moved up in their top 10s, whether it was for the team or for the NFL. And I'll continue to do that. But the way I'm going to do it this time, because I realized I'm not really exactly talking about the games as much. I might mention that they won a game, but then later on, I'll talk about the other team, after I've, who knows, 5 minutes later or something like that. So what I'm going to do is talk about every game, but I'll use the same top 10s. I'll talk about any player in that game, either team, and I'll bring up the chart and show you the chart and say, hey, this player moved up into the top 10 or is the number one all-time player as far as whatever category it might be. So that chart might pop up in and out as I go from game to game. So if there's 2 players on a team that are in the top 10, you might see that chart twice in some format. Who knows? But if it's an NFL type record, that would be one way you might see a chart twice. But I think that way you'll get a more context of the game itself and not just the numbers of the top 10. So I was thinking about that as I looked at the way I was doing it, and I thought that should be a better way to do it. All right. I appreciate you listening. That is a look at some of the top 10s for Friday. Please like and subscribe. I appreciate each time I see a new subscriber. That's good for me. I appreciate it, and I'll continue to improve it. And if you have any comments, suggestions, just leave it in the chat area of whatever format you're using. You can find me on YouTube at Just the Stats NFL. And as I've mentioned, always the videos will have all these charts. So I don't go through the entire top 10 of every category, but you could see it if you want to look at who's in the top 10 when I put up the charts. All right. You can also find me on YouTube, I've already mentioned, also on Spotify, Apple, and whatever podcast app you use. You can also email me at justthestatsnfl@gmail.com. And again, I appreciate you listening. That is a wrap for this episode of NFL Top 10s for Friday. So I'm out. Enjoy your Sunday football.